Welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I'm here to help you excel through the stories you tell. But being a compelling business storyteller is hard for some because it takes focused, deliberate practice. That's why I consult, teach, coach, and speak internationally, helping leaders just like you become confident and persuasive communicators to help you connect with audiences like you never have before and to excite them to action. I would be delighted to bring you and your team one of my in-person or virtual storytelling mastery classes or mastery course. Or you can even take advantage of my ABTs of Selling online training right now. Either way, please let me know when I can bring the business of story to your world. And until then, enjoy today's show. I'm so glad you're here. Hey, do you have a presentation coming up and you're looking for a little consultation, a little help? Well, you're in luck because our guest today is an absolute expert at helping people make concise and compelling presentations. And she is a big believer, as I am, in the power of three to make your presentations amazing, starting with the overall three-act structure of entrance, enlighten, exit, which happens to be the name of her new book, A Guide to Help You Make Phenomenal Presentations. But even with this easy-to-follow story structure, it can be hard to deliver without other memory aids in hand to keep you on track.
I'm a huge believer in notes. People who want to present and say, I just wing it, or I don't want to use notes because it looks unprofessional. What looks unprofessional is reading your notes constantly, but looking at your notes for a clue, looking at my notes to go, wow, that story about Peggy, that doesn't seem to be really working. What other ones do I have on my list here that might be better to demonstrate my point and get more eyeballs and nodding going? I'm a strong believer in using notes.
Deborah Ostreicher has spent a lifetime performing on the stage and over 25 years in leadership positions around the globe, including as marketing director for a multinational high-tech company in Central Europe, as events manager for no other than Prince Charles in the UK, and most recently as the vice president of Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. She is now the president of Distinguished Communications, an international firm that dramatically improves communication for individuals, teams, and for entire companies. Deb told me the other day that just like the Business of Story leads its leadership storytelling training by first teaching the three storytelling forces of agreement, contradiction, consequence, as represented in the ABT, the and, but, and therefore narrative framework you've heard me speak about often here. She follows the same sort of format with her presentation philosophy. A great story or presentation will grab the listener's attention from the very start with your entrance. Then you'll take them on a journey as you enlighten them and close on a very convincing note with your exit. We'll cover exactly how to do that today on the Business of Story with my friend and soon to be yours, Deborah Ostreicher. Deborah, welcome to the show.
Nice to be here with you, Park.
Man, what do we go back to? Like 1996? Is that when we first got acquainted? The Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport was my second client at Park & Company, Marketing Communications, Inc., and I was doing project work with you all. And then the opportunity arose to become your agency of record, and I jumped on it and was fortunate enough to run with you guys for about 10 years as your agency of record. I think that goes way back to 1996.
You are exactly right. I miss those days. We had a lot of fun together coming up with ads and ways that we could promote Sky Harbor Airport. That was awesome.
It was so much fun, and you had quite an illustrious career there, moved up to a deputy aviation director and vice president. Did I see that right in your bio?
I did. My job when I came to the airport originally, back when you and I met in 1996, was to recruit international airlines. And what a cool job. My job was to fly around the world, talk to airlines, and convince them that they should fly to Phoenix instead of Fiji or Miami or some other remote place. And over the years, I grew into, yes, you are correct, the vice president of the airport, or as we called it, assistant director in city speak.
Assistant director. And we were doing something pretty unique that really came out of your office there. I wish I could say it was our idea, but it was really your interesting approach to biz dev. We did a lot of advertising over there, but instead of your typical B2B advertising trying to attract in these airlines, we took very much of a tourism approach to demonstrate all of the attractions that both their business traveler, their leisure traveler, and their cargo traveler could take advantage by flying directly to the desert Southwest, directly to Phoenix. And that was a really fun, interesting B2B campaign, sort of masquerading as a tourism campaign.
Yes, indeed. In fact, there's a lot of research to show that the people who come to visit as tourists often end up coming back to live or open a business. And so tourism can be so powerful in that way. And it was fun to attack that beast with you to try to maximize on that, because where there are bigger populations, there's more demand. And when there's more demand, it's easier to get more air service. So that's why you have so many destinations from Sky Harbor.
Well, I think the interesting thing about that approach that we can apply to today's show and presentation skills is taking something that is familiar, the familiar B2B marketing, and be novel with it. Break the pattern, find a more interesting way to connect emotionally with that executive out there through how you tell that story. And we had a lot of success with that particular campaign.
It was so helpful having you teach us that at the airport so that we were better at telling stories that captured attention versus just spitting out statistics, which I think is a mistake a lot of people made. And you taught us how to do that differently.
Oh, well, thanks, Deb. And now you had an interesting career arc there too. You showed up one day, made a presentation that blew a bunch of people away, and then all of a sudden you became the presentation guru and had to do this for everybody. Can you give us a little bit of backstory of how that all came about, and what's that one big problem we are going to solve for our listeners today?
You are so right about that, Park. I did. When I joined the city of Phoenix, as you mentioned, in 1996, I can tell you that presentation skills at a large city organization, I think probably across the country, aren't necessarily the very best skill, but I was very lucky. I had some expert training early on in my career, and I didn't realize how valuable it was until I got to the city, started making presentations to the Phoenix City Council, to the airport board, to the mayor, to the governor, and I started getting tapped into being asked to present to a lot of different people on a lot of subjects I wasn't aware of. And I think to answer your question of what was I solving for then and what did they see in me, I think it was the ability to boil it down to the most important information and deliver that information in a way that was consumable to the masses, because that's something I think everybody struggles with, no matter what your subject is.
Now, you were an actress, and I know you did a lot of plays, and maybe still do. Well, maybe not because of COVID, but maybe that's coming back. Did your training, your theater training, really help you in that presentation mode? Second part of that question is, or did you find yourself presenting just intuitively, and you realized, and you were successful doing it, and you needed to become more intentional about it so you could teach others?
Well, that is a complicated question. So let me start with the first part about whether I'm still acting. I consider myself more of a comedian than an actress, although I don't do stand-up, but I do perform in comedic plays. And yes, to your point about COVID, the last play I was in was running in March of 2020, and we got shut down. And so we never got to finish out that run. I think we only got to do the show a few times before it got shut down. So I don't have another one until this coming January. I expect to see you there, Park. As far as my training, for sure, when you're a professional speaker, as you and I both are, you know that thinking on your feet can be an asset. And for sure, in live theater, unlike in television, things come up every night on the stage that you might not be expecting. And so I think lifelong training of having to deal with that is certainly helpful. When it comes to boiling down a message into consumable bites that an audience can understand, whether you're talking for 5 minutes or several hours. I hope no one's talking for several hours. The training that I had early on teaching me to really boil down the subject matter into consumable bites that the audience can digest easily was some of the best advice I ever got, as opposed to, I think, what most people have a tendency to want to do, which is spit out everything they know. And that's not going to be an effective communication style.
See, so you just bailed me out because I asked a very complex question and you simplified your answer for my listeners. Thank you for that. Because after that came out of my mouth, I go, wow, Park, what the hell were you thinking? So let's go simplify it even more. What is the one thing that you found early in your presentation career and outside of theater? You're now in the business realm because you had to wear these two hats. I mean, you were the spokesperson for Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. Saw you on TV a lot. You had that professional, job that you had to do. And then you had this comedian actress, which is kind of the side hustle, having fun. But you bring that all down. What was that one thing in business presenting that really struck you that said, oh, here's one of the secrets I need to know when I am in front of a business crowd?
Have a goal. Have a goal of the communication. So often when I speak to my clients and I say, why are you making this presentation? The first answer is, it's just an update. Or, I don't know, so-and-so asked me to. And one of the things my clients tell me is most helpful to them is, many people will say, know your audience. And that doesn't really tell you anything. You can know, I've got a bunch of real estate agents in the room, or I have a bunch of car repair people in the room. What does that tell you? Really, the objective of having a goal or knowing your audience is deciding in advance, why am I here? What's the purpose? And what does this audience of insert X, what are they there for? And how can I help them get what they came to get? So focusing on them and their needs and the goal of the interaction versus just rehearsing the things you want to say. That would be the biggest thing that was helpful to me, is understanding that.
And in all of your duties at the airport, they started coming to you to not only give all these other presentations, but to then start coaching up and training some of your other colleagues. Can you take us a little bit through that and how that has basically brought you to distinguished communications?
Sure. So the original speeches I was giving were about my original job, the air service development. But soon people who had responsibilities that had nothing to do with that and needed to go make a speech would come to me and say, hey, can you make this speech for me or make this pitch? Because I know my stuff, but I don't really like public speaking. And so I did that for a little while, but I got so busy doing that, I wasn't really able to spend time on my own job. And I thought, I need some disciples here. I need some other people who can do this. And while I wasn't a professional trainer, first I brought in an amazing professional trainer to help us. And then I realized, well, I think I can take it from here. And I started training other people so that I could get back to my job. And the things I was training them in most were, like we just talked about, making sure they understood why they were making the presentation, what the objective was, so they could decide on what are the things that I need to communicate most importantly, even though I know a whole bunch of other stuff. what are those most important pieces? And that really helped people to boil down the information and get the results they were looking for.
And your new book that's just out, Enter, Enlighten, and Exit, is your basic 3-act structure to presentation training, right?
It is. So this new book takes that training that I developed and honed with hundreds and hundreds of people, both at the city and in the last 5 years or so outside of the city. And I'm retired from the city and doing this privately now, as you mentioned. And that is that training boiled down into a book that both we use in the training, but also if you're not going to come to a seminar, it certainly gives you a lot of tips that you can use to do the things I'm talking about.
Yeah, I love it because it's easy to digest. It's not long. It's 162 pages. It's like this perfect little guide that you can have by your side whenever you're putting together any kind of presentation, and you help take us through it. Would you give us a few of the main pointers out of it that someone could take away from listening right now and apply to a presentation that they may have right in front of them?
Sure. I think what surprises people the most is the ratio of your message with regard to how much of your message is your words and how much of your message is everything else you are doing. So, for example, right now, your listeners are listening to me as you've put me up here as somebody who knows something, and they're thinking, does this person know what she's talking about? And even though they can't see me or my body language, they are, and you listeners, you have every right to be doing this. We all do this. They're thinking, does this person know what she's talking about based on the tone in my voice, the words that I'm using, and my approach? And that's part of what we address in the book is that we focus so much on the words that we're using and we rehearse and think about the words that we don't think as much about everything else that goes into a message. So that would be number one, is learning all of the different things that go into your message, especially if somebody can see you, then it's a whole different thing.
So that's
Next,
that's how you show up, your presence, what you're wearing, your slide deck design, all of that sort of stuff.
Exactly. What are the messages you're giving off that have nothing to do with your words that are helping or hurting people's ability to take in your message? And then the enter, enlighten, and exit is the 3-part structure of how to formulate an effective message. And simply, it's this. Every message should have an entrance, meaning an attention grabber of some sort. 3 different points that I call the enlightened section, whatever those points may be, that your message is boiled down into 3 key points. And finally, when you're finished, having some kind of an exit, having a way out, rather than doing what many people do, even in professional presentations, which is, okay, that's it. So this book helps you to think about what are those last words that come out of your mouth? What is your exit from that message, whether you've been talking for 5 minutes or 30?
Can you give us an example when you were on stage and you went up and really owned a business room with your entrance?
Absolutely. One of my favorite ways to enter is storytelling. And that's something that I learned at the Business of Story, because we all have stories, but we don't all necessarily know how to use them. In fact, in our seminar, while we don't really teach storytelling, we leave that to the Business of Story, we do emphasize the importance of it. And part of one of the exercises we do in our seminar on presentation skills is to ask everybody to tell a quick story. And you probably face the same thing, Park, in your seminars. The minute you tell somebody, please tell a story, they don't have a single story. They've never told a story before in their life. And so storytelling, we found, is a very effective way to make an entrance. It helps set the stage. It helps let people know, where are we in this and where are we going? And so when it comes to an entrance, I may have a story that comes up on my way to the seminar that morning that really sums up my feelings about how it is to be with that group that day. Or I may relay something that happened to me when I was 5 years old and show the relevance to it. But I find that nothing is more effective. Even though we teach a lot of different ways, storytelling is one of the most effective ways to enter a room and grab attention.
Can you take us to a moment in your presentations where you told a story, and maybe you even had some butterflies? You're like, ooh, is this the right story to tell? But you went with it anyways, and you really brought down the room. They're just like, yeah. Do you have one of those? Because it seems like all of us speakers have been there before.
Absolutely. One of the ones I like to use the most, well, you tell me, Park. I use storytelling in two different ways. One is tying fiction and stories that we're all familiar with and making a transition to life today and drawing that parallel. It could be, the old women in the shoe, where you draw a lesson from that. And you've taught me you can use either fiction stories or something that happened to you last week or 20 years ago. So I use both. What do you think we should talk about now? How to draw a fairy tale in or a real life story?
Well, I would default to the real life story, and I call it a connection story, or that moment of connection. And that's what I use, especially if I'm in front of a crowd that just simply doesn't know who I am. And they're like, do I got to listen to this joker all day? Does he know what the hell he's talking about? And so, for instance, a case in point, I spent 4 years working with the U.S. Air Force out at Andrews Air Force Base. 2 sorties, I'd call them, storytelling sorties a year. I would fly out and I would spend a half a day with their brigadier to 4-star generals, teaching them about storytelling. And Deb, I've never served. And so I'm just, a civilian showing up in front of them, and I want to get them to connect with me. So I was fortunate in that I married into an Air Force family. Michelle's father, Major James Reynolds, he flew 52 missions over Europe as a fighter pilot in World War II. He flew in Korea. He flew and was an instructor in Vietnam, was in a Jeep accident in Vietnam, became a paraplegic. And I knew him only for a short while after Michelle and I got married before he passed away. Anyway, fascinating guy. When 9/11 hit, we were there, and we can all, just by saying that, you can immediately picture exactly where you were when that was all going down. And we were sitting at home with our kids and our 2 young boys. Corbin, our daughter, was a bit older, but we had our 2 young boys, and Michelle was really, really concerned with this attack because she was afraid that they would now consign our kids, put them into the service, and off they went. Her greatest fear is not only what her father went through, but what she had lost her only brother, James Reynolds, in Vietnam. And so she's like, our kids are not going to serve. We will move to Canada if that's what it takes, because I can't stand losing another one, another loved one to war. So she was praying to her dad, said, I wish you were here, Dad. I wish you could tell me what's going on. Why are they blowing us up? Why do we have to be over there fighting and killing all these people? 1 week later, Michelle was in a Tuesday morning store, and remember that 9/11 happened on a Tuesday morning, and she was walking down the aisle, and this little model airplane caught her attention, and she looked over at it, and it was an F-86, the same airplane her father flew in the Air Force. He was also a member of the Sky Blazers, which was the first aerobatic flight team that was the precursor to the Air Force Thunderbirds. And he was captain of that, commander of it in 1954, and created the paint job for this F-86. Well, she looks over, and here's the model with her father's paint job on it. She walks up to the counter and asks the lady up there, she says, what does it say under the cockpit, right in the cowling right there? And it said, Major Jim Reynolds, her dad. I mean, I still get choked up when I think about it. Here was her father's model airplane in a Tuesday morning, 1 week after she had been praying all week, saying, I wish you were here by my side. I share that story, and then I asked the generals, I said, so I'm here, not as an Air Force individual, but as a civilian, and I want to be your storytelling wingman. Do I have your permission today? And of course, they all would give it. And then I would go on for the next 4 hours. But I told that story, as remarkable as that story is, to have that connection. And so when I'm trying it, I'm always trying to find first a connection story. How can I connect myself to the people in the audience?
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that, Park, and I love that story. And what a perfect one to have. And I love the little advertising man in you that tags it with the "Can I be your wingman" on that? Because that
You have
didn't
to have
go
a call
by
to
me. I love
action.
that. I love that. And that does remind me of a time that I had a group full of people in the seminar who came particularly because they were terrified of public speaking, but they got the courage. And I say public speaking, everything we do is about presentation coaching, whether it's really, you can use it at the dinner table or in front of 500 people, but it's about boiling down a message, right? But this group came together in particular because they were really terrified, but they got the courage to come and sit in a room with me to see what they could do about that, because all of their jobs required them to get in front of people, whether their own staff or a formal meeting. And they wanted to find out what they could do to help alleviate fear. So, to your point about storytelling and how to use that as what I call an entrance, the first thing you do when you begin to engage with a group, I told them about my former secretary, Peggy. I don't know if you ever met Peggy over the years, Park, but Peggy was a career secretary at the city of Phoenix for some 20 years, part of which she took some time off to raise her children and then came back as a secretary. She was the best, and I had a lot of secretaries in my time at the city of Phoenix, but Peggy was the best, most efficient, incredible secretary I ever had. And she had so many amazing skills. And I always pushed Peggy to apply for promotions to see what else she might want to do, because she was so stinking good at her job. I just saw so much potential in her. But she said, I really don't want to, because I am terrified that as I move up in the organization, I'll need to have a staff and start making presentations at staff meetings and then maybe beyond, or be involved in organizations. Peggy got up the courage to come to this seminar earlier, a couple of years earlier than what I'm talking about. And so what happened with Peggy is, she very nervously but courageously got up and made her first presentation, and she admitted she was terrified, but she did it. The next day, she made a couple of more in the practice, and she was nervous but outstanding. Soon after that, after our seminar, she had the opportunity to speak at her church, which she never would have done before. But she got the courage based on the training we had, and she spoke at her church and got a standing ovation. She came back to me and said that she had been invited to speak at a secretary's meeting, which she never would have done before. She spoke at the secretary's meeting and got feedback after that she was the best speaker they had ever seen. Fast forward, you can imagine that Peggy continued to take these opportunities based on the training she had, and she kept doing it, and she kept getting this wonderful feedback, keeping me in the loop. And eventually she had the chance to promote. And she went to that interview, she knocked it out of the park, and she promoted up through the organization many times, including, now get this, including to be a spokesperson for Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. Meaning, not only was she just speaking to her peers, but she was going out to the community and giving professional presentations as a spokesperson for the airport. So when I think about people like Peggy, who were shaking so badly she could barely stand up, and the courage she had just to come and listen at a seminar like the one I had with people in that day, that's what keeps me going and lets me know that, as scared as you may be, when we think about Peggy and the courage she had, it makes me realize that everybody in this room today can give it a try and see where it's going to take them.
It's just training, isn't it? I mean, what are we fearful of? Our ego gets in the way, and we are afraid of looking bad, sounding dumb, blowing it on stage because we just simply don't have some basic training to get us up there. And one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got is when you've got those butterflies and you're really nervous, it means your ego is at play and you are more concerned about yourself and how you come across versus being in service to your audience. And as soon as you make that paradigm shift, it's not about me. I can fall off the front of the stage. I can have a booger come out of my nose. I can completely lose my way and have to go to my notes. As long as my heart is in service to that audience, they will forgive me for all that. They won't hold it against me as long as I'm giving them the goods. And then following some of your very practical training on how do you do that so you don't have those little guffaws up there that might throw you off. But it's actually simpler than people think if they just follow some basic training and do some practice. Would you agree?
I would agree. And doing things like what you just asked me to do is share a story that you use with your audience and talking about things that are real. And Peggy is real. I hope she doesn't mind me saying no. She said it was okay if I use her as an example because she's so proud of herself and she's since retired. But sharing stories like that, I think, are far more effective than if I were to say 82% of the people I work with over the first 90 days achieve a 74% increase in confidence. I mean, who wants to hear that? I personally would rather hear one story about Peggy that's backed up with statistics if you want them. But the storytelling, as you've taught me, is what resonates with people and can let them into your world in a way nothing else can.
Have you ever had a story fall flat? Or you picked the wrong story for the crowd, and you're like, "Oops, let me park that story over here. I don't know if that'll be a go-to for me."
Probably, I probably have. I mean, one of the things I'm so focused on is reading the audience, and something that I work hard to teach everybody who comes to the seminars is that this is not about you. It's about your audience. When I ask, and here's a tip, if you ever come to my seminar, Park, I will ask you, who's the most important person in the room right now? And it's never the speaker. It's the audience. And so, as you said, if you're not in service to the audience, you shouldn't be there. Just send them a white paper. So when I look out into the audience and I don't see eyeballs and nodding and smiles that tell me that it's registering, that's maybe where my stage training comes in. It's time to switch gears because clearly this story about, maybe it's the one about Peggy, it's just not connecting with this particular audience. So I'll wrap it up and move on to something else. So having an armory of things in my pocket ready to go is really important. And to that point, let me just say this. I'm a huge believer in notes. People who want to present and say, I just wing it, or I don't want to use notes because it looks unprofessional. What looks unprofessional is reading your notes constantly, but looking at your notes for a clue, looking at my notes to go, wow, that story about Peggy, that doesn't seem to be really working. What other ones do I have on my list here that might be better to demonstrate my point and get more eyeballs and nodding going? I'm a strong believer in using notes.
Earlier, you had said in the Enlighten segment, so enter, enlighten, and exit. You said 3 points that you feel like you got to have 3 points that support your overall premise of your presentation. Why 3? What happens if people have more? Or what if they have less?
Well, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, Park, because I know what a strong believer you are in the number 3 as well. And I think the reason that we are both so married to this number is because it's magic. But to explain that more, 3 is a simple pattern. And study after study has shown that our brains can't really manage more than 3 easily. So if you think about any list or any mission statement you may have heard that has more than 3 pieces to it, my bet is, for the most part, unless you've really worked to memorize it, your brain can remember 3 out of the 4, 5, or 6 pieces that are there. And so when it comes to constructing a presentation, using 3, even if you have subsets under that, but giving people 3 pieces to remember, and golly, if they all rhyme or start with the same letter, even better. But I don't ask people to do that. If you can just boil your message down to 3, the way that we do that in our seminars is by throwing down everything in the world you can think of that you want to convey onto a big old whiteboard, or if you're sitting at home, a piece of paper, and then start to look for what are the things that seem to go together that are important to this audience. And as soon as you start to do that and circle the things that go together, believe it or not, they will boil down to, usually I find, 3 key areas and a couple that you realize, you know what? I don't actually need that after all. It works every time, and I love the process. I just love it every single time I go through it with someone. I think it's magic.
Yeah, there's a naturalness to it that makes it that magic. And as you know, you and I just did a seminar together, and that was great fun, where you demonstrated the presentation techniques you teach. Then, of course, I talked about storytelling and how to insert them. And, of course, my 3s are the ABT, the and, but, and therefore. I think it is so important, and one of the points I believe you're making here is, in that presentation, you have to have a singular narrative. You're not out to solve 3 issues. And you can take issue with me on this too, Deb. I'm totally fine with that. But I believe that when you are trying to tackle more than one significant issue or problem in a presentation, you're going to lose, because our brain has to focus on that one. We set it up with an and button, therefore, to set the stage for this. And then you bring in those 3 points that you're talking about in the Enlighten section, saying, let me demonstrate or support the premise of my presentation, the ABT that has set up this one problem. And here's challenge number 1 we need to deal with. And here's number 2. And anyways, every time you introduce one of these 3 points, you use an ABT, set up problem resolution, to make it make sense to your audience, and then are always tying it back to that main point, that singular theme of your presentation. Have you found that to be true in your work as well, or can you tackle more than one thing in one presentation?
Well, I think we're on the same page. We may be using just the slightest difference in language here. I agree with you in that one thing is the goal you are there to meet. In order to meet this goal, in order to convey this message, in order to get the action I'm after, I want my audience to do this or understand this. And I will convey that message to meet the goal using 3 key points. And so I think we're saying the same thing. Those 3 key points support that singular goal, like you're talking about, that one issue.
Finally, exit. What are a couple, 3 things that we can do to exit strongly in a presentation?
It's one of the hardest things to do the first couple of times, but also one of the most effective ways you can set yourself apart as a professional speaker, even if it's your own staff you're talking to. Because as I mentioned earlier, that one of the most common ways people end an engagement or presentation, because it doesn't always have to be so formal. Again, it can be just in your own office with a couple of your folks. But the way that most people end that is, any questions? After delivering what may have been a very effective message, they don't have a way out. They don't have a final line that is either an ask or a quote, a final story, an anecdote, something that lets their audience, however big or small, know that it's over. And so when it comes to exiting, that is one of the only lines we ask our students to memorize because we want to be so sure that they don't, what I call, leak out of the room and just not know that it's time to be finished. And I've seen professional speakers struggle with this over and over. One of the best places you can really see how hard this is if you watch an award ceremony like the Emmys or the Golden Globes or whatever your go-to show is, and they do that terrible thing where they list out all of the people they want to thank, and then they just kind of stand there like a deer in the headlights, and they don't know how to get off the stage. And if I were coaching these professional actors who clearly haven't been given lines for the award ceremony, or they would be great at it, just tell them, I'd like to leave you with this. Say that line and be gone. And that's really what exiting is all about. Can I share one of my favorite ones of all time?
Absolutely.
When I worked at the airport and in the aviation industry, my favorite exit line of all time after any speech went like this: 1 mile of roadway will only take you 1 mile. But 1 mile of runway will take you anywhere in the world. Thank you. That's an exit line. An exit line will make the little hairs on your neck stand up. Just like what you said, Park, when you said at the end of your story, you didn't say, so that's my story. You said, Michelle walked up to the register. She asked, and they told her Jim Reynolds. And my goodness, I mean, that's just so beautiful. That's an exit line in a story, because you can't just end a story and say, that's it, right? You have to have that final exit line. And that's the same with a presentation.
I love that line. Did you write that line?
I have to say I did not write it. I stole it, which is my very favorite thing to do. And I encourage stealing from each other as much as possible in our seminars because we get great ideas from each other. I stole that line, and I should really call him and ask him because we're still in touch. Do you remember the airport director, David Kreider? You remember him.
Oh, yeah. He was there when we were the agency. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he used to use that line all the time, but I should really call him and ask him who he stole it from or whether he made that up.
You didn't steal it. You just repurposed it, but it's a beautiful line. I really, especially in the airport world. I mean, I might have to borrow that for the Air Force next time too, but I will give you and David credits.
All right.
Well, Deborah, thank you so much for being here. Where can people learn more about you and the seminars that you give here? Well, in Arizona, but you are traveling around the country now giving your presentation seminars. And of course, where can they find Enter, Enlighten, and Exit, a simple guide to making clear, concise, and convincing presentations?
Thanks, Park. The book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble under Enter, Enlighten, and Exit. And our company is listed on LinkedIn under Distinguished Communications, as well as if you just Google Distinguished Communications, you'll come right to our website, distinguishedcom with 2Ms.com.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks, Park. It's always great to have a chat with you.
So much fun. And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. Listen, if you are in presentation mode, and it doesn't matter if you're frightened to death or you're an old-time pro, check out Enter, Enlighten, and Exit. I read through it the last couple of days. That you can sit down and get through it in about 90 minutes. But what I really, really love about it is there are all sorts of actionable insights and worksheets to help you keep your presentation on track and deliver. And of course, pepper it with stories because that's what really brings the context around your data, turning that data into drama, and own the room. So if you liked what you heard today, share this episode with other colleagues and friends that may be in presentation mindset as well. Until next week, if I can be of service to you, come on over to Business of Story. If you have not yet taken the ABTs of Selling online course, check it out at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And of course, the companion guide, the 75-page book that I wrote, co-authored with Dr. Randy Olson on the ABT called The Narrative Gym for Business. You can get a copy of that on Amazon, both Kindle and print version. So please join us again next week when we will have another amazing story artist right here, like Deborah, for you. And my exit, as you know, if you are an ongoing listener, is as you are learning storytelling, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.